on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Joining us now, live from Cairo, Eddie Yeranian, Cairo, Egypt. Edward, our man in the Middle East. Edward's been with us 9 years, reporting on the John Fredericks Show. We love him to death. Plus, Edward, longtime veteran, CBS Radio News, and of the America's VOA, Voice of America. He's covered the Middle East for 25 years. Edward, great to have you, man.
Thank you, John.
The president goes to Tokyo, has a press conference. Let's look at the Iranian situation right now. The president's saying, look, I don't want war with Iran. I just want them to change their behavior. The Iranians saying, hey, you know what? If it is, it is. We'll do what we have to do. We've survived U.S. sanctions pressure for, 50 years since Carter. We're going to continue to survive it. What happens now?
Well, I think we're going to see some skirmishes on the ground. I think Iran is going to do some proxy activity using its Hezbollah, its Houthi, the Houthis in Yemen, the militias, Hushed militias, Shiite militias in Iraq, and they have their own militias in Afghanistan too. So I think they're going to give us a little bit of a hard time. I don't think they're going to escalate too seriously because I don't think they want a war at this point. I think the supreme leader is playing his cards, but I don't think he wants to get into a conflict either. And he's the bottom line, Ayatollah Khamenei.
So neither party wants war, right? That's obvious, right? Neither. It's in no best interest for anybody. But how does the United States now define success with Iran? What do they want Iran to do? Tom Cotton, yesterday, Senator Arkansas, said, look, we want the Iranians to change their behavior. What exactly, specifically, are they looking for the Iranians to do? And is that even feasible because of the whole safe face issue that goes on in the Middle East?
Well, I think the key issue is their ballistic missile program. I think that's what's got a lot of people worried because they've been working consistently on their intermediate and long-range missiles. They've been claiming that the long-range missiles they've been working on are actually intermediate-range missiles, which means they're able to go farther than they're claiming they are. That being said, I've seen some of their missiles in action. They fired them in retaliation after an attack on their Revolutionary Guard forces in the Kurdish province of Iran. And they hit inside Syria. It wasn't clear that they hit any target that they were aiming for, assuming they were aiming for anything. And a couple of them apparently, according to Iranian missile experts, exploded before even getting off the ground. So I don't know that they're being very successful, but they're certainly creating a worrisome development by working on them.
All right, let's get to the arms sales deal. The president wanting to push forward with an arms sales deal to the UAE and to the Saudis, and Congress rejecting it, but the president says he's going to go forward and do it anyway. There's no question an obsession the president has, and I'm going to be critical of him here. There's an obsession he has with getting arms sales deals. I don't understand why it's in our best interest to keep arming people that take their bombs and blow school buses up in the war in Yemen and markets and whatever. But I guess the president's position is, look, we have to continue to arm the Saudis and arm UAE in case of some kind of a Iranian conflict or conflict with the Houthis that have fired rockets at the Saudis. What do you make of this?
Well, I think President Trump, fairly soon after he became president, indicated he wanted to have strong relations with the Saudis. A lot of this is financial. The Republican Party has always, generally at least since the Bushes, had strong relations with Saudi Arabia. They get money from Saudi Arabia. The Democrats get money from Qatar. I think it's sort of a bit of a tit for a tat. And the Qataris run their media operations criticizing the Saudis, and the Saudis do the same about the Qataris. And our two parties, political parties, are mixed up in these in the Gulf politics of these two countries as well. So You can understand that the Republicans would want to work with Saudi Arabia if the Democrats are working with Qatar. I mean, that's a broad brush I'm painting for you there, but a lot of it is true. President Obama had good relations with Qatar, the Clintons, it's a financial thing to a certain extent, and a media thing as well. And each Gulf country has its own media. They report about things, and sometimes their reports are totally different, and you don't know which one is telling the truth and which one is not. Putting it bluntly, I think Trump needs to have Saudi Arabia as an ally if the Democrats have Qatar as an ally.
When you say they want different administrations to do it in different ways, though you look at it now, it's kind of not as clear as you're saying, because there's a lot of Republicans that support Qatar, like Scott Taylor and others. There's a lot of Democrats that still support the Saudis. So. But one thing is interesting. It's if you look at the lobbying, right, in Washington by the three countries, right, you take Saudi, UAE, and Qatar, and you just look at the lobbying, Edward. The Saudi UAE lobbying presence versus Qatar is probably something like 25x as far as people and money. I mean, you run around Washington on K Street. I mean, you got so many people that are representing the Saudi and the UAE interest, and a handful of tiny firms that represent the interest of Qatar. And so that our audience understands this, all foreign countries hire lobbyists to help them navigate their way through Congress so they can meet with certain people that advance their agenda. They lobby administration officials. It's all legal as long as you file the paperwork. But then you look at the money spent, and the Saudis and the UAE, their presence in Washington makes Qatar's look absolutely ridiculous. Does that have an influence on policy?
I think that the lobbyists may have an influence on the advertising and what people in the public might think. But in terms of the relations with people in Congress and the movers and shakers in Washington, a lot of that is not done through lobbyists. That is done through contacts with people who are people who are much more below the radar. And I think some of those, I don't want to go too much into detail here, but I mean, there was a report that I saw about Qatar buying up properties in New York and Washington and then renting some of them out at favorable rates. And I'm sure the Saudis do things like that too. So I don't think that's something that's different from one country does something different. But at the same time, there are a lot of reasons, financial reasons, why someone might want to support one side against the other, which have nothing to do with American interests. And you see that with Israel as well. I mean, Israel packs a lot of clout in terms of lobbying and in terms of giving gifts to people. So this is part of our domestic political problem. We need to probably have term limits and get rid of some of these people who are taking money from various countries that they shouldn't be taking money from, and from lobby groups that they shouldn't be taking them from, unless, of course, they're acting truly in the interest of the United States. And I see a lot of them who I think are not.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We're with Edward Yeranian. Good to have you, Edward. Edward is our longtime analyst in the Middle East, veteran CBS Radio, voice of America, and the John Fredericks Show, and he's live in Cairo. Edward, let's get to the Yemeni situation. There's definitely a movement now in Congress to get the U.S. out of this war. In fact, when you're done, in about 20 minutes, I've got Senator Tim Kaine coming on, and this is one of the topics that we're going to talk about. There seems to be a growing sentiment in Congress to get out of this Yemeni war, where we're backing the Saudi-UAE coalition there against the Houthis. Things have gone awry. The Saudis are incompetent. Everything is a disaster. They spent $1 billion. They have nothing to show for it. They're actually losing the war, as far as anybody can see. The humanitarian crisis in Yemen is beyond the pale. You've got children eating leaves off trees, starving to death on a daily basis. I mean, it's just a horrific situation. Remember we had Mattis saying we were going to get out of there? We're still there.
Yes. Well, I think this is a lot more complicated than that. And I think the remedy people are putting forth, just cutting ties with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, is just going to entrench the Houthis in Sana'a. And I think that may have been part of the goal of the Obama administration. I think maybe Obama had something to do with the Houthis getting to Sana'a in the first place, because there was no logistic reason they should have been in Sana'a in the first place. And yet somebody let them in. So I think this is a foreign policy issue that may have something to do with dividing Arab countries and dividing Yemen. Some people would like to see a North and a South Yemen, like there was back in the 60s and 70s, and I guess up until 1990 when they unified, something like that, or 94 maybe. So I can understand why some people are pushing for that, because they've been pushing for it anyway. But saying that the Saudis and the UAE are incompetent, I mean, they're incompetent maybe because they kill a few civilians, but we've been killing a lot of civilians too in Ramadi, in Fallujah, in Mosul, in Raqqa. I mean, I see it all the time, and our people just deny it. And the Pentagon correspondent usually comes out and they say, "Oh well, our Pentagon spokesman says that that we didn't kill any civilians, so that's it. They didn't kill any civilians, even though all the anecdotes on the ground say they did." So, I mean, I don't think anyone that uses bombs from the air doesn't kill civilians. I can't blame them any more than our coalition forces for bombing civilians in Deir Zor, in Raqqa, in all those little towns that they've bombed in Iraq as well, under the guise of attacking the Islamic State group. And the Islamic State group, for the love of me, I mean, after 32 years in the Middle East, I would love to see some news media group tell me who is behind that Islamic State. I have some ideas about who's behind it. There are a lot of people who are probably behind it, a lot of countries behind it, a lot of intelligence agencies, but they never talk about it. Why? Because I don't think they want to accuse the people who are behind it. So it's a big mess. It's a big mess, and I think the interests in Yemen, the powerful interests at play are that some countries would like to divide it. They would like to use the South. They would like to have maybe Iran with an influence in the North. That's a policy goal. That's not has nothing to do with the Saudis bombing civilians on the ground.
So, based on your analysis, Edward Yeranian, what's the best we can do here? I mean, what should the U.S. position be? Divide Yemen? What should it be? I mean, everyone is concerned about the Houthis and the territory they've gained there, but they're entrenched. They're actually winning that war as far as, if you put checkers, if you put pieces on a map board, they're actually winning. And Iran has spent, I don't know, a couple of $1 million. Mohammed bin Salman has spent $2 billion, and he's losing the war. What's the end game? I ask this question to everybody. What's the end game? Nobody has an answer.
Well, I think the Iranians don't want to solve this problem because they would like to keep an open, oozing sore on the border with Saudi Arabia, with the Houthis shooting drones and missiles into Saudi Arabia. That's a pressure point they have, the same way they put missiles in Basra aimed at our forces, our bases, the same way they use their Shiite militias in Iraq against us if they need to. The same way they use their Shiite militias, Hezbollah, against Israel. It's not; these are not problems they want to solve. I mean, the Lebanese border. How many times the Israelis tried to solve that problem? They pulled out of southern Lebanon, and the Hezbollah just picked another pretext that there's one little town on the border that hasn't been liberated, and kept its militia on the border with all those rockets it has in people's basements. So I think the Iranians would like to have their peons all over the Middle East. I don't think they care about solving some of these problems, and I don't think you can solve some of these problems. Ideally, the Yemenis should be at the table negotiating, so they find some solution between them, amongst them. But it's not happening, and certainly by not arming the Saudis or taking away their U.S. equipment, that's not going to solve the problem. Definitely not.
So you would be, based on your analysis, you would be in favor of continuing the arms sales?
I think that it's inevitable. I mean, if you want to keep one side sort of on a par with the other side, you basically have to arm them, unless you want the other side to run over the side you're supporting.
Right.
And I don't think we want the Iranians or the Houthis to run over the Saudis or the Emiratis.
Edward, final thing. Let's talk a little bit about the Gulf and the crisis, that blockade that's still going on, coming up now on its, third year, I guess. I kind of lost track of it. That has really hurt all of our relationships in the Gulf because it's rendered the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, basically meaningless now. There is no cooperation with this blockade, which has been ineffective. Qatar's gone way beyond that. Their economy is stronger now than it was. I mean, is there ever a day where the Saudis just drop the sword and say, hey, this just didn't work, and they reopen up the lanes? Or is it now an ego thing, a saving face thing that you get when you deal with these countries in the Gulf, Middle East? Is there an end to this in sight?
Well, I think a lot of it is an ego thing, but there are occasional issues, occasional incidents where you see that they're trying to improve relations. I mean, the Saudi King Salman invited the Qatari Emir Sheikh Tamim to the Arab Summit and the Gulf Summit in Mecca next weekend on the 30th. Mm-hmm. I think that's a possible overture to Qatar. I'm not sure whether they're expecting a quid pro quo. Qatar needs to do something in return for us to improve our relations with them. But a lot of it was based on the fact that they were supporting different groups and different countries in the Middle East, and I think the accusation that Qatar is supporting terrorism in some instances. Well, the Qataris say that the other side is supporting terrorism too. So I mean, let's just be neutral here and say they're not supporting the same proxies all over the Middle East, and perhaps they need to sit at the table and decide, if they're going to back off supporting certain groups in order to have harmony among themselves.
Great analysis as always. But look, it is a big development that Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, did invite the Emir to that summit at the end of May. I think that's a step in the right direction because the U.S. is better off with a unified GCC than it is now that's split down the middle. Edward Yeranian, we're out of time. I want to thank you for being with us. Edward Yeranian, our man in the Middle East. Thanks, Edward. Great segment as always. You are the man.